Hello, welcome to our webinar focusing on IPAF's Safe Loading and Unloading course. My name is Peter Douglas and I'm the CEO of IPAF. My first duty is to thank our sponsors, and they are Hinoa, MCS, Jeshlift, Green Power Design, Astri Company Limited and Sunward Equipment Group. Thank you very much for your support, guys. Without your help, we couldn't run these webinars. Today's webinar will be simultaneously translated into German, Italian, French and Spanish. If you are watching live, please choose the button at the bottom of the screen and select the appropriate language. So today's focus is on our new instructor-led loading and unloading course. It's currently only available in English and was launched in November 2020. We've had some fantastic feedback on this course from our UK training centres and members. And if you're interested and you think there is a need in your country, we're happy to look into translating it into any of our other core languages. So we have three presenters today. Firstly, you're going to hear from Brian Parker, IPAF's Head of Safety and Technical. Brian will run through the accident data that we collect through our accident reporting portal, which is really useful in understanding what goes wrong, focusing on loading and unloading. Paul Roddis, IPAF's training manager, will then show you how we've used learning principles to turn the accident statistics into engaging exercises for the learners. Then finally, you will hear from Martin Wraith, who is currently an IPAF auditor, but has got many years of experience running his own haulage business and was part of the work group that developed this course. And that's the exciting part. Martin will be running you through some of the contents of the new load and unload course. There is an opportunity to ask questions throughout the webinar. Please type into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen any questions you may have. The speakers, as we go along, may pick those up and answer them at the end of their presentations, but we have allowed around 10 minutes at the end of all the presentations, and we will endeavour to answer as many of those questions as we can. Hope you enjoy the webinar. I'd now like to hand over to Brian Parker. Thank you.
So that should work, and we'll get Brian back so we can show you the background to the reasons that we created this training course, which is, of course, the reality of the dangers faced by people that are loading and unloading. And the reality of those made it very clear that as an industry, we do need to do more to protect those people that are at risk. And that, of course, is most frequently our drivers. So I'll explain how we, through a working group from the training committee, of which both Martin and Brian were members of, put this course together. So I'll start by explaining some of the theory behind the way that we went about it. I'll show you how our ideas have developed into reality and some direct examples of this. And then lastly, I'll finish with a brief conclusion before handing over. So we'll start with the methodology we employed. To create a genuinely valuable learning experience, then you first must understand and apply some learning principles. I mean, simply having correct information on a screen and telling people things is an ineffective method of training. And that's why things like this webinar are short and uncomplicated. You simply cannot achieve deep learning with this sort of methodology. So one of the principles that we apply within our training courses is what's called the revised cognitive domain. And yeah, it's a bit wordy, but it's also very important. So over on the left of the scale, we start with the lower order thinking skills through to the highest of the higher order thinking skills on the right. So what we can see here is that remembering something is the lowest of the lower order thinking skills. And remembering something also means, of course, that you can forget it and you don't even have to understand it. So clearly learning anything verbatim is almost entirely pointless. So, of course, we have to make sure that any learner also understands. Now, some training even today actually stops at this point. I've been asked to offer my opinion on newly created e-learning, and far too often it's a passive experience where you simply sit and read or watch as the information is supposed to flow into your brain. And this simply won't happen effectively. Learners need to be applying their learning, and in some cases even analysing information if we want them to be fully capable of applying their learning effectively in the real world for the next 5 years and beyond. Once we get right at the scale to evaluating and creating, we've gone beyond what's actually going to be useful for this specific training course. But these are skills that we would want to see from a manager and a planner. So those elements were incorporated into our Mutes for Managers training course. Now, generally only 10% of learning takes place in normal structured learning programs. 20% of learning takes place socially, sharing ideas, discussing concepts and experiences. And 70% of learning takes place when people are applying new learning in real situations and actively solving problems. We used this knowledge to create situations where candidates could apply their learning during the course, would share ideas, discuss concepts and experience, and ultimately solve problems within the training course itself. Now, finally, we incorporated the latest in learning neuroscience to maximize the efficacy of the experience. And this latest information tied together with the previous theories and provided evidence of why these methods were effective and old passive training less so. For learning to be truly effective, we have to engage the learner. We have to build new knowledge onto existing knowledge and provide frequent opportunities to consolidate the learning. We have to engage the frontal cortex through the brain's reward system. And a great way of engaging is through novelty. And I mean novelty in the sense of something unexpected and new to the learner. Visually stimulating, innovative and surprising training will capture attention. Issues that engage curiosity have been shown to stimulate activity in the brain's reward regions. And showing something pretty standard but in a new and novel way will also grab the attention and thereby increase the likelihood of a learner fully understanding and remembering what we need them to. Once we have engagement, we need to build new knowledge, which requires activity here in the frontal working memory regions of the brain. New knowledge builds upon existing knowledge, so an instructor needs to know what existing knowledge a learner has. When adding new knowledge, we're using conscious thinking and reasoning, and this is called the working memory. But working memory is very limited. The amount of information coming into the active working memory is called cognitive load. And while this looks complicated because of the wording that's used, it's a very simple concept that must be considered if you want to create a useful training course. In basic terms, information coming in needs to be clear and not too much of it at a time. Distractions need to be minimized as distractions prevent processing of the information coming in. And once the working memory is full, you can't add more without losing some of what you've put in. So you have to provide the tools to allow the candidates to process the information and in so doing, integrate it with their existing knowledge. This integration of new knowledge with existing knowledge is consolidation, and consolidation takes place through practice and rehearsal of freshly learned knowledge. This processing will quite literally shift and distribute activity from the conscious short-term memory through to other parts of the cortex and into the unconscious long-term memory. Now, this causes it to be automatically accessible, and the brain's limited working memory will be ready for more new knowledge. So using this methodology, Martin and I spent what turned out to be a very enjoyable day back in May 2017, taking the content from the working group and creating ways of making it engaging, social, and consolidating. We knew our audience to an extent because both Martin and I had been professional delivery drivers, and we wanted to be sure that our audience wouldn't just benefit from the training, but would actively enjoy the experience. So these are photographs of our original concepts on a flip chart. And as you can see here, there are all sorts of different types of exercise around which a wide range of topics could be covered in the new course. I then turned this idea capture into what we only slightly jokingly call a storyboard. It's not like you probably imagine if you've ever seen an old Disney storyboard, and disappointingly actually look like this. Basically a PowerPoint with content information that uses text to describe graphic content and exercises. So of course, a major challenge now is communicating effectively with the external course developer that knows almost nothing about MUPs, loading, vehicles, or what was in our heads as to how it would actually look. This, of course, happened with every exercise and involved hours of discussion and some very bad drawings by me to try to show what I meant. So this is the original storyboard for the vehicle inspection. Happily, the organisation that developed the course for us really did listen to us and always asked questions when they were not 100% sure. And as a result, we got what we wanted. So what started out here as a vehicle inspection concept employing learning science was turned into this, which starts as a discussion. By using this as a question, we immediately determine existing knowledge. We engage the candidates in discussion and they can share their experience and learn from their peers. We then go on to building knowledge by guiding the candidates to specific elements that need focus, like, when should it be done, recording, and specific actions that should be taken. Following on from that, we consolidate the learning with the application of their knowledge in an engaging way. So depending on how the instructor wants to run it, candidates can actually directly have the opportunity to select the items for themselves or to direct the instructor on what they want to select. Now, Martin will be showing you how it all actually works in his presentation. So I'm just going to show some static snippets as example of the growth from concept to finished items. So I'm afraid you'll have to wait for Martin to see some of it in action. So continuing with my theme of concept to finished item, our ideas for introducing the vehicle range became this, which not only looks brilliant, but provides information in a very clear way. We can even change the view to show it from a completely different angle, and we can show and discuss specific areas on some of them. So this more novel approach is engaging, and it allows candidates to choose which order they look at the vehicles, which views to look at, and which elements to raise questions on. Candidates having some control of their learning is a huge boost to engagement. So we also took some of the statistics and presented them in an easily understandable way. And again, we use these to ask questions of the candidates. So for example, we would certainly ask why they think that most incidents occur in the yard. I mean, we know clearly they're in the yard loading and unloading more frequently than anywhere else, but equally, this should be a controlled, safe environment with procedures and supervision. Following or during this discussion, we'd be exploring what they as individuals could do to prevent anything happening to them. So you can see here very easily the three environments where most incidents happen: the yard, the construction site, and roads and highways. So we directly took those three environments to create hazard spotting exercises. So this is part of the construction site. And what they'd be doing here is they'd be looking for hazards, discussing these, and then ultimately trying to control them. So as far as control measures is concerned, this again would be a group discussion. And what you might be able to see from the options available, that there's not only one right answer, because of course it depends. So it'll be a really useful discussion around their specific personal experience, and it's also consolidating learning around the three highest risk environments to them. So here you can see the second part of the finished axle weights and positioning exercise. By incorporating these interactive elements, candidates can see what would actually be happening in a way that you can't really in the real world unless you place load sensors under each wheel, which is unlikely to actually happen, of course. Another great way of engaging is through problem solving. And this exercise is quite an interesting and realistic puzzle based on real weights and sizes. The idea is that all the equipment must be loaded and none of the vehicles should be overloaded. So there's more than one correct solution, but there are a lot more incorrect ones. And importantly, it's actually fun to do and can be gently competitive, depending on how the instructor chooses to run it. Some instructors would start by asking the candidates what additional information they need and hopefully getting answers around weights and capacities. Once these weights and capacities have been supplied, candidates can work individually, in pairs, or as a whole to decide how to complete the puzzle. When they have a solution, they can actually directly try it by sliding the machines onto the vehicles, see if they were right or whether they need to try again. On a different note, this may seem like simple one-way information, but actually it's used as another important discussion point. Statistically, the safest place to be when moving a vertical mute is inside the platform. So the instructor would ask the candidates how and when they're walking mutes. Do they have rules around this and do they follow them? I mean, what we know is that the people that were injured were generally experienced drivers and operators, and I'm pretty sure that none of them thought that it would happen to them, but it did. And the candidates will make this connection themselves, guided, of course, by the instructor. So respecting candidates and allowing them to come to their own conclusions, guided by the instructor, rather than being told or simply shown what they should do, will have a significantly greater effect on how they choose to work back in the real world. So in conclusion, the working group from the training committee, and in particular Martin, were instrumental in delivering an exceptional learning experience. There were a lot of challenges along the way, but equally there were some great moments, like actually getting the true breakdown of what's really happening to drivers from the incident database, and therefore being able to directly address them within the course. So this was overall a very effective project, producing a truly exceptional training course that both instructors and candidates will enjoy. And most importantly, one that's likely to reduce harm to the people that load and unload vehicles. Of course, my primary role is updating and improving training courses, but I'm very much aware that training is just one small element of protecting our people from harm. Training can only work as part of a safe system of work, along with good planning and competent supervision. So thank you very much indeed for listening. And if you have any questions, put them through in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll be happy to answer. So now I'll be handing over to whoever's going to next, which was maybe and hopefully will be Brian. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Paul. Hopefully we've sorted it now. I'm afraid, as the old British saying, the show must go on. So Chris has now got my presentation in the office, and it's going to be run remotely. So hopefully that's all showing for your good selves. So today I'm going to give you an overview of accident definitions, incidents by personnel, then essentially focus on the driver by introducing the accident triangle for drivers. And I think this is a really important concept that we kind of understand. Then I'm going to look at driver types of incidents, what configuration of the machine was in at the time of the incidents, where they're having the incidents, what locations, does it all happen in certain places, and of course the body parts that are injured, and the machines that the actual drivers have the incidents in. And then last but not least, just show you a very, very quick bit about the accident portal. So Chris will move on the screen. So when we formed the accident work group, we essentially had to come out with some definitions, and it was really important that we identified what these definitions were, because some of them are slightly different. Now, I can appreciate all of the top four you pretty much will understand, but the amount of incidents that were pertinent to damages to machine or property was quite astounding. So to be clear, this is where no injury has actually happened to a person, but the mute, perhaps a transport vehicle or a third-party property is damaged. So typically costs are involved in this to repair the damage, whether it's to a vehicle or to a machine or, unfortunately to a wall. There have been some high targets that have actually been struck by vehicles and machines and trucks. So, certainly something to be mindful of. And of course, one of the real important things is identifying, near miss. So this is where no injury has occurred. However, there was significant risk of injury. Just to remind you that any data that you put into the accident portal is 100% safe and anonymized. Okay, so even before we start collecting the data, we can see on the next slide now that the access industry knew that the driver's role was one of the most dangerous in the rental sector. But essentially, there was very little evidence held within IPAF or with, other than perhaps a hearsay. And I know certainly from being involved with, training and rental businesses for many years, and with IPAF members requesting that the load and load course, of which Paul's just given you a bit of an insight into, was updated and improved. And this, with the belief here, that it would help reduce accidents. And it's fair to say there was regular conversations in councils and committees that I was present on. But without evidence, what can we do? And so having had the accident reporting mandated in the UK as part of membership, that data started to flood in. Now those of you who have been around drivers know that they're often expected to be in the depot well before many other staff. Dark morning, cold mornings, wintry, in all types of weather, moving and loading and skewing machines, and then heading out of the gates of your rental depots to fulfill orders to your customers. But then what? What happens on the road? What happens when they arrive at the premises? What potential personal injuries do they have? They've been caught on CCTV not using harnesses, yet we preach and promote the fact that they should do it in the depot. And this is one thing I want to, I'm not giving drivers a hard time, is they are ambassadors, very much like anybody else that attends a depot, attends a location of your business. And that can reflect both positively or negatively, in terms of what they do. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, so that you are clear now, all slides that we're shown today on today's presentation are from anonymized data collected and analysed by IPAF and the Accident Working Group from 2012 to 2019. So what you're seeing there essentially represents 3,342 incidents that were recorded. There's a few at the bottom, which it goes on to some minor injuries. But to give you context of this data, and this is worldwide data, fatal, major and minor data by persons, what you're looking at there is 349 fatal incidents, of which 3 were members of the public. There are 205 major injuries, and there are 1,070 minor injuries. Also, within that data, there is also 737 reports of damage to machines or property. If we click on the next chart, this data then identifies that delivery drivers are the highest operators, then operators or occupants. If you just click the next slide, please, Chris. So in the platform, so occupants in the platform, followed by perhaps engineers or technicians. If you click on the next slide, Chris, if I isolate that out though, if we look at rental operations and focus on delivery drivers, this really reaffirms that the severity of the incidents drivers have are generally more of a serious nature. And I also know, and if I look at from businesses that I've been involved with, often engineers and technicians and other people in the depot are always helpful colleagues, and they'll sometimes unload vehicles, perhaps not trained in the load and load, and they've had incidents in the past. So, they may make up some of the data. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is what I wanted to introduce in terms of the accident triangle associated really for drivers. So sadly, 11 fatalities have happened to drivers over this period. Chris, if you just click through that, there'll be 2 clicks per slide. And then next slide we've got is major injuries. Now, let's not mistaken, some of these will be life-changing, some of them it's within that. The next slide will be then minor injuries, where, without doubt, I think this is underreported. And, drivers are tough people, men and ladies, perhaps they don't want to draw attention to themselves that they're, having incidents, or maybe even they accept that it's just part of their job, that they're going to get the odd cut or scrape or, pull a muscle. The next slide identifies the types of machine that have been involved with damage. So, whether that's damage to the unit itself or damage to property at the time. So they may have been driving a 3B, ran into a wall or ran into another machine. Sometimes it was no machines involved. So, for example, the truck reversed into a wall and knocked it over. And we're talking of all sorts of things: gates, power lines, telephone lines, etc., parked cars. If we look on the next slide, then the majority of the incidents are reported from drivers, but from a near miss perspective, these are the near misses that have been reported. Undoubtedly, most of these have been reported by UK rental businesses, but I think this is very low. But it gives you an indication of where the near misses are actually happening. And don't forget, from a construction and other, this is your ambassadors out there. You know, they've been reported. Sometimes it comes back via the channels of your own business. And remembering, of course, that, you know, that triangle that I've showed you there, you know, everyone at work should be able to go to work and go home safely to their families at the end of the day. So it's very important that we understand the seriousness of this. If we look into the next slide, initial look at all the data surrounding the delivery driver indicates that the largest proportion was attributed to slips, trips and falls on the same level. So if we look at the chart now, you can see that this was essentially, you know, on the back of vehicles, chaining down, strapping down, you know, slips on the ice, tripping over the beds on the vehicle, etc. But you can see the other type of incidents that drivers have, and it's perhaps no surprise here. But let's just not be very serious here. There are fatals and majors in there, and identified in data, and you can see there's some loading and unloading tip overs. There's some falls from platform. There's some road traffic accidents. Unfortunately, there's some entrapments, overturns, and electrocutions. Now, although I'm not showing this slide now, interestingly, the incident reports were either in yards or workshops, and you know, so they're in the process of being loaded or unloaded, and there was also some in the process of being transported. And sadly, five of the fatalities that were captured worldwide were during the loading or unload process. Okay. If we move on to the next slide, please. So, as we know, most you know, those of us in rental depots and this type of industry, we know that most lost time incidents happen during the loading and unloading process, with loading tip overs occurring too often. So if we look at this next picture, a definition of a loading tip over is different to what we'd consider it to be an overturn of a MUP. So the MUP has fallen over or tipped during the load and unload process, you know, whether that's on the transport vehicle, on the ramps, and this would also include, for example, partially being dislodged from the truck bed, the trailer, or the ramps. Now, this is distinct essentially from, you know, a MUP overturn, which you typically or may see on a site or a contractor's premises. Also, as well, if you just click on the next slide, Chris, we have to consider as well when MUPs are in transit on the road. So, you know, route planning and you know, structures that they unfortunately hit. So in this situation, you can see this one in the United States where it's you know, literally ran straight into a bridge. But you can see there, you know, it's essential that the driver ensures the height of the vehicle and fully lowers the machine is important. So not securing the machine and making sure it's coming off the side is also identified. And although I do feel that some of this is underreported, we need to be more conscious of this. And one thing I also will report on, number of canopies that have come off machines. So drivers, you know, let's encourage them to get canopies secured. We can't always rely on the manufacturer's you know, method of securing them canopies. Okay, in the next slide, and the chart here, you can see there that the data highlights the most incidents happen on a construction site, but also in rental depots, followed by highways and then commercial premises. In rental depots, the top 3 incidents for drivers are loading tip overs of machines. That's followed then by unsafe situations with collisions and with objects, which includes also fixed objects, like I mentioned also, but also people. So let's not forget, of course, also highlighting the fact that falls from platform is also factored within these stats. So we've had drivers fall from platforms whilst unloading. And if you've searched some of the YouTube channels, you'll perhaps see some drivers being ejected from platforms from time to time. On a construction site, collisions are the top. So, you know, our ladies and guys are unfortunately running into things, followed very much by loading tip overs. And let's not again forget falls from platform, because that has happened in that sort of area. Let's consider the fact that if we train them as an operator to walk the route, they should also really be walking the route where they're going to take their machine to. Roads and highways, you know, no surprises really there. It's probably, you know, it's road traffic accidents, followed by transport and then unsafe situations. So where we've had vehicles come off the side of transporters. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. Okay, when we consider body parts, it's very important to understand that, you know, we're all able, we're all willing, and we all go to work, but the least thing we want to expect to do is to be injured. So this chart shows that the location on the body where injuries are occurring. So for example, the lower limbs, the trunk, of the body, upper limbs, the head and the face. So think about when you've seen some of the vehicles leaving your own depots or rental locations, and they've been unloaded with a myriad of different mutes. The drivers have to probably think about how they're going to load their machines. If we take into concept of what Paul's just explained about how the load's going to be positioned on the vehicle and make sure that they don't fall foul of loading characteristics. They then may have to change their position because they've suddenly realised that they may be, loaded in, too heavy over the front axle, and then they've had to secure them with the pieces of equipment, so chains, straps, in securing methods. So clearly, working on the vehicles does have its challenges, and from walking into booms or walking into scissor decks, injuries sustained from manual handling. They're all there, and these have also happened on the highway too, where people have suddenly realised, drivers have realised they've got out on the highway, and perhaps they've not engaged the sloop in, or had to get back on the vehicle to sort out, and injured themselves doing it. If we look at the next slide and the next chart, this then identifies the types of injury ranges from sprains and strains and bruising and impact pain, but you can also see some burns, and there are also some amputations within there as well. So clearly life-changing events. There are some others and unknown, as you can see there. That's because the older accident portal didn't have the ability to identify the type of incidents. So I'm quite pleased to now say that we know the new portal does actually identify what part of the body was injured, so we can drill down into that. Okay, next slide then, Chris. Filtering by near misses. For me, this was quite interesting to look at this. Because if we look at filtering by near misses and damage to machines, this identified that the 3B type machines, there was 246 incidents where this occurred. So you can imagine some of the size of the booms that have been moved around, rental depots and locations, the big pieces of equipment often thrown around and moved around by drivers very quickly. For scissor lift or 3A type machines, there was 158. And it does say there that there was no machine involved. That was 127. So again, near misses by a driver in a rental depot or on a construction site, hitting into various things, or near miss into various things. So good information there, and you can see there's some 1B and some 1A type machines there too. Okay, next slide, Chris. Of course, this is my last slide, which just really sort of like a help me out. And please encourage reporting in your business and to your clients. You are at the forefront of being able to sort of encourage people to ask people to report their incidents. We need more accident data, near misses and information to shape existing courses, and future courses and guidance is so important. Now, IPAF's vision is to be recognised as a collective voice and leading safety organisation for the powered access industry globally. And by registering, if you can just click on the next slide, Chris, to report your incidents, you will be doing your bit. If we look at very quickly the next slide, it will show you an information of quite simple about the incident, who was involved, what the machine, what the activity, and what actually happened. You can do that very, very quickly and quite succinctly. And if we look at the next slide, just gives you an indication of how much now it's been improved to really sort of just use icons to report machines. So, okay, next slide. That's me. Thank you, and apologies for the IT issues. I know I'm going to get some grief from this from my colleagues and from my peers in the industry, but that's life. The show goes on. We've got there in the end, and I will book myself onto a Zoom training course very shortly. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. That was very interesting. I'm pleased to see that we got there eventually, because we wanted to have missed that. Okay. My name's Martin Wraith, and as you've heard, I'm a member of the working group that put the new working course together. And I'm going to give you an overview of the course, which I hope you'll find interesting. And we'll look at the source of the information, the course structure, the entry criteria for delegates, a flavour of the theory session, and then finally a look at the practical session. So, where did the source of the content come from for the theory session? Whilst the course content is legislation neutral, obviously it had to meet with what are accepted as recognised standards and requirements within the industry, as well as local legal requirements. Sources used were numerous, but included the findings of the IPAF accident portal that Brian's just spoken about, guidance documents, and industry best practice, British and European standards and legislation, and a wealth of knowledge from the volunteers within the working group who gave their time to put the course together, for which we are very grateful. With a course that is to be delivered around the world, there are regional differences I'm sure you can appreciate, and therefore the course content is the minimum requirement, and instructors will add regional requirements where applicable. The course follows the same structure as the old version, with a pre-theory test consisting of 14 questions to establish delegates' existing knowledge. However, as delegates are already qualified operators, if they fail the post-theory test, they will now be allowed to continue with the practical session. They must, however, attend the course on another day to gain the load on their PAL card. The reason for this change is to allow the course to be used as Driver Certificate of Professional Competence, or Driver CPC as we know it, which is a legal requirement throughout Europe and the UK. IPAF-approved training centres wishing to utilise this option should gain approval from the relevant approvals body to be able to do so. Whilst the duration of the theory session will vary, obviously, depending on the number of delegates and their previous experience, it is anticipated that it will be similar to the current presentation. And from the courses that have been delivered so far, that has been found to be the case. The practical session currently remains as per the original course, but it has been reviewed. COVID, unfortunately, has delayed this slightly. There will be a set of minimum requirements around the number of machines to be loaded, the type of securing devices and methods of securing used to ensure consistency and a standard approach. And we will inform you of this as soon as possible. As Brian has already highlighted, and the findings of the IPAF accident portal prove, loading and unloading plant comes with numerous potential hazards. It is therefore vital that those attending the course have previous experience and therefore a degree of competence using the equipment to be loaded and offloaded. So the course does allow for various types of plant to be loaded and unloaded, not just mutes. So it's important that delegates are competent in the use of all the equipment they're going to use within the training session. A recognised operator card for the type of plant to be loaded, such as a PAL card, is obviously preferred, but failing that, a letter from the delegate's employer confirming competence is acceptable. Those loading vehicles should have knowledge and experience in the use of the vehicle to be loaded. So they should hold the license type required to drive the vehicle, or again, the employer should provide written evidence of competence. So if we now look at the course itself, sometimes though, to appreciate how good something is, you've got to take a look back at what it's replacing. Now, whilst the old course was very good, the way we can present information has moved on since the course was put together, as Paul described. And this slide shows how different types of vehicles were presented in the old presentation. And this one goes on to show how vehicle inspections were presented. And as you can see, it relied on additional explanation from the instructor and gave little in the way of photographs of the various items. So let's look at the new presentation. We have a full range of vehicles. Each one has various views and a brief explanation of the typical carrying and anchorage point capacity. So delegates will be able to relate to the type of vehicle they are familiar with, as well as being introduced to others they are not so familiar with. Gathering this key information at the start of the course enables us to refer to it in the weight distribution and securing exercises later in the presentation. Delegates are asked to volunteer information about their own vehicles, which can be referenced throughout the course as well. Whilst we wanted to cover as many vehicles as possible, it's not always possible to include every type. There are others, tilt and slide, roll on, roll off, for example, used around the world, but the principle of knowing your vehicle and its capacities remain the same. It's also worth pointing out that we appreciate that everyone doesn't have a new vehicle with all the latest features. anchorage points down the center of the vehicle, an edge protection, for example. But it would be wrong not to feature these and promote good practice and highlight what is available and can often be fitted retrospectively. So when talking about vehicle inspections or daily checks, it's always important to remember that delegates have some previous experience. They should already understand the basics of a daily vehicle inspection, oil levels and lights, for example. So the vehicle inspection section focuses on the components that are key to the loading and securing process and should be completed before commencing the loading operation, even by those who may not be driving the vehicle, but just responsible for loading it. We start by asking what should be checked. How would you record the fact that the checks have been completed? A defect book possibly, or a mobile device? And what would you do if a defect was identified? And who would you report it to? How serious is the defect? Is it serious enough to require immediate attention, or can you continue safely on your journey? We then look at 12 items, as you can see on the screen at the moment, of a typical plant moving vehicle that should be checked before use, giving an explanation as to what the check should involve and what will be classified as a defect. Instructors will ask delegates what they think requires checking and then zoom into the specific area of the vehicle and the item to be discussed. And I think you'll agree that this is a great improvement and far more interactive. Whilst every feature may not be on the vehicle being used for training or on the delegate's own vehicle, it ensures that delegates are made aware of the features that are available and may be on a new vehicle when older ones are replaced. The positioning of machines on a vehicle is key to ensure individual axle weights are not exceeded and to ensure steering and braking mechanisms work effectively. In this section of the course, delegates can position initially one machine on the vehicle, and the weight imposed on the front and rear axle changes accordingly to the position selected. Should the weight imposed on either axle be incorrect, the delegate can reposition the machine and the axle weights change accordingly until the correct position is selected. The next slide in the presentation follows the same principle but with two machines rather than one, simulating the reality of a driver collecting and delivering multiple machines and the need to reposition them to ensure individual axle weights are not compromised. At the end of the theory session, there is a video of a real-life accident which was totally avoidable if only the driver had put into practice the training he had received. The footage is taken from an onboard vehicle camera, and I'm sure you would agree the weather and the ground conditions look almost perfect. The vehicle bed and the machine wheels are clean, free from contamination and dry, yet by not using the winch to assist offloading with the machine and not allowing a suitable runoff area, serious damage was caused to the roller shutter door and the machine. Not to mention the fact that the driver was very lucky to avoid serious personal injury to himself and others. If we think of the implications of this incident though, accident investigation costs, contractors not being able to start work, insurance claims, increased insurance premiums, delayed deliveries and collections, machine under repair, possibly waiting for parts, and potentially the loss of a customer, all for the sake of not using a winch. So obviously this training has great benefits if delegates adhere to what they've been taught on the day. The practical session allows delegates to put into practice what they have learned during the theory session. Everything from completing a risk assessment to ensuring the load is secure and the vehicle is in a fit state to go on the public highway. The slide shows the contents of the session. However, with loading and securing plant, there are various ways of completing a task, and the session looks at all the alternatives and promotes what is accepted as good practice. It's important as well to remember that company policies and safe systems of works are adopted by delegates when they go back to the workplace. So those responsible for such items may also benefit from attending the course to understand what's required and to be able to then demonstrate competence. So by encouraging people and engaging people to attend this new training course, reporting accidents and sharing information, we can collectively help to reduce the number of accidents and fatalities within the MUP and plant industry, as detailed in Brian's presentation earlier, and work towards IPAF's objective to promote the safe and effective use of powered access equipment worldwide. That brings us to the end of my bit, and I hope you've enjoyed it and found it a good insight into what we think is a very, very exciting new course. And I'd like to hand back to Peter now, who will guide us through any questions that may have been submitted. Peter.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for that presentation. There's not been too many questions coming through, and quite a few have already been answered, but I just wanted to make a point that one of our viewers made. Look, overall, delivering and collecting and loading and unloading machines is done millions of times a year across the world quite safely. It's only a very small percentage, probably, you know, point something of a percent where it goes wrong. But when it does go wrong, it causes a significant issue. You know, 11 fatalities that we know of through our accident data collection, but many serious injuries, and the cost of the ongoing damage as well to equipment, machines, as Martin had said there, and the example you saw there, you know, buildings, insurance, loss of productivity is absolutely massive. So we think it's right and proper to focus on it proportionally. Certainly in my old business, proportionally, drivers were a big issue in terms of accidents and lost time incidents. Overall, it's absolutely a safe practice. We hope to be able to get to a ratio to say that, you know, X percent of deliveries go off without any problem, but we do need more data. So I will reiterate Brian's plea for, you know, if you've got information, near misses, accidents, lost time incidents, with regard to anything to do with powered access, please input that into our portal. You can see the type of work that we do with it, and hopefully that's worthwhile. I would also like to say there's lots of work gone on over the last few years. Martin demonstrated it then with regards to making the delivery and collection and the loading and unloading of machines safer. The manufacturers now are working on autonomous loading, you know, remote control learning, so the loading and unloading, so the driver doesn't have to be on the machine or around the machine and can do it by remote control. You know, the improvements to delivery vehicles, of some of those graphics showed with solid ramps, you know, guardrails, extensions, so drivers can walk around machines and load and unload while they're on the back of the bed, non-slip boards on the bottom, and even lighting now to help drivers loading and unloading in the hours of darkness. So there's a lot of improvements that have been made, but we're still getting incidents, we're still getting accidents. Hopefully our improved training course you know, will help improve things further, but we will continue to push our mission to improve safety in this area. We've had a common theme on a few questions, which has been around asking for a copy of the presentations that you've seen today. We can make them available if you write to us separately. We can send you the PowerPoint slides if you find them maybe useful in toolbox talks or presentations you guys want to do. We can make them available, but just to say, this whole webinar will be available on the website shortly after we finish today. I'm just looking for any more questions. I've got one here for you, Brian. Can I ask that the data started 982 were delivery, but 400 were other? Can you speculate what they are?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I've seen that one. So what you would find is that these back in the day, the portal never had the ability to enter free text. So essentially, if the person that was logging the incident never actually put that the incident was under a delivery, it just sat there in a null and not sort of identified route. So it could have been, you know, it could have been during load and loading, it could have been during transportation. So that's essentially what's happened. What I am happy to say now with the new portal, will actually not allow you to enter that. You've physically got to put that it was a during, loading, delivery, collection, etc.
Thank you, Brian. We've got a question from James Quirk. Are we going to do this as an e-learning course as well? Paul?
Well, Jim, we would certainly like to. Obviously, I've got a certain number of projects that are already scheduled, but I think there would be benefit potentially in making it into e-learning. But it's such a practically based course, and the discussion between various different drivers is so useful that we really need to have a good think about whether there's real value to that or whether we'd actually potentially lose something. So it'll be open for discussion and probably will involve people from the training committee, and you'd be very welcome to be on that working group when we discuss it.
Thank you, Paul. I think I've got another one for you here. How should you as an instructor try to break already established bad habits? And there's an example on there, somebody working for a lot of years doing the same role, never had an accident, but doesn't really work in a safe way, uses damaged straps, won't use a harness, etc.
Yeah, that's an enormous challenge, and realistically, that's a cultural element. So it's not just training; it's whole part of a whole bigger picture, and where people sort of buy into the concept that it's not just looking after themselves. The reality is you're looking after your family, your loved ones, your friends. If they lose you, that'll be really significant. So trying to motivate people to understand that good practice is actually looking after their loved ones, not just themselves, part of it. And of course, having proper safe systems of work that everyone buys into and works with, so it becomes normal to do it right and completely unacceptable to do it wrong. So it's a big question. So sorry, a short answer.
Thanks again, Paul. One from Phil Lomax. There are some specific issues when loading, unloading spider type equipment related to whether machines are loading cage first or last. Has this been incorporated into the course? Do you want to take that one, Martin?
Yep, can do. We've tried to incorporate as much as possible within the course, but obviously with the vast variety of machines that are out there, it's impossible to include everything. But spiders is one thing, tracked access is one thing we have picked up on. And there is a slide asking what delegates think should be done differently, and then we explain the correct way of doing it. Having said that, obviously the key thing is to reference the manufacturer's manual to make sure that you're adhering to their guidance, because it can differ from machine to machine.
Thank you, Martin. I've got a question from somebody from the States, Anthony Calaccia. Do you plan on expanding this course to the US? I mentioned that at the beginning. It's written in UK English. We can soon translate that, Anthony, into US English if there is a need and a demand for it. So the answer is absolutely, if there's a need and a demand. Sorry, I did find another one, but these keep moving as people keep asking more questions, which is good. One from Simon Old. Would it be possible to find out how many accidents are caused by workload, such as pressure on driver? One for you, Brian.
That's a great question. I think there's having been involved with the drivers for many years, the pressure is intense, and what we don't always consider is the amount of calls they're getting from customers, the hire company, the account manager, the guy shouting for his machine. I think in terms of that, it's a very difficult one to sort of pinpoint. But that's something that we would always try and have a look at in terms of we could probably put. If we take into account what was mentioned earlier about the amount of loadings and amount of collections that happen each year, there will be a good proportion of them that will be done under duress, under pressure, get that kit off site now, etc. So I think it's a hard one to sort of answer, but again, it'll be down to each business.
Yeah, I think that is a horrible question, a really difficult one to answer, and one for me down to the investigation from the individual company. We don't probably go into that much depth, but a great question. I've got a question. Do you have to be a HGV driver to deliver this course, Martin?
Do you have to be a HGV driver to deliver the course? One thing we're looking at is the criteria for instructors, and it's very clear that this is one course that the instructor has to be absolutely familiar with the equipment, the procedures, and be able to demonstrate competence. So whilst it would probably wrong to say that you don't have to be a HGV driver to deliver it, one thing we're looking for is experience and competence before any instructor is signed off to be able to deliver it to delegates. And I think without having some sort of experience in the industry, it is difficult to do that. So the answer to the question is no, you don't, but then we have to be able to demonstrate competence.
Thanks, Martin. I've got time for one last one from, I'll pick one from Charlie Ellis. I thought you'd retired, Charlie, but hello, hope you're well. Have IPAF liaised with Jout re the hours need to qualify for the CPC? Paul?
Okay, well, I'd like to pass it over to Martin because he is genuinely an expert.
I thought you might do that. Whilst IPAF have put the load and load course together, it's been put together in a way that it can be utilised for CPC training. Now, people who are involved with CPC will know that you cannot include testing in the 7-hour duration of the course. So that's why the reason for the change with regards to the theory presentation. So the post-theory test, if a delegate fails on the old course, they were off the course and that was the end of their day. So that wasn't acceptable. Whereas with the new course, because we can extend the day, we can actually get the delegates through the course without it being a pass or fail situation from a CPC point of view. And there was actually another question related to CPC, and it was around approval. And I think we should just make people aware that whilst IPAF have put the course together with CPC and the requirements of CPC in mind, IPAF haven't and won't gain approval for delivery of this course as CPC. So people will have to gain approval in their own right to be able to deliver it through the awarding bodies.
Thank you, Martin. That concludes the questions that we're able to answer live, but what we will try and do is get back to you. We've got the Q&As, and we will try and respond directly to any individuals asked a question and not had it answered. There's still some coming through about, is this available in X language? Absolutely is available if there is a need in that language. So as I said at the start, please speak to your local IPAF representative or contact us directly. So thank you very much to our three speakers, to Brian, to Paul and to Martin. Apologies for the slight technical issue at the start, but well saved there, Paul. Massive thank you again finally to our sponsors. They were Hinoa, MCS, Jesh Lift, Green Power Design Astri Company Limited and Sunwood Equipment Group. We've got another webinar coming up very shortly on the 10th of February on developing a mute safe use plan. So if you haven't registered for that already, registration is open. And please visit our website, www.ipaf.com/events, and you can register for that webinar then. We will also be sending you a brief survey for feedback. Please give us some feedback. It's how we make these things useful for you guys. Any things you liked, any things you didn't like, please give us some honest feedback and slaughter Brian on his use of technology and Zoom, please. But we'll try and get it right next time. Thank you very much for your time, guys. Goodbye.